When predator cubs discover a grieving human technician crying herself to sleep, they evolve the ability to absorb her tears and her pain, sparking a galactic revolution where empathy becomes the strongest evolutionary trait. Night Monitor Krexval had seen everything in his 20 years of security work. Bar fights between methane breathers and oxygen users. Smugglers hiding in waste disposal units. But the biochemical alert flashing on his screen defied every protocol in his database. 8 Selkarian predator cubs had breached their containment area. These weren't pets or companions. They were apex predators whose saliva contained enough neurotoxin to liquefy a human in minutes. And right now, all 8 were surrounding power grid technician Emma Rodriguez's bed, their tongues extended, licking her face in continuous, gentle motions. Commander, their saliva, it's not toxic anymore. It's therapeutic. The bioscanner readings made no sense. The cubs' tongues moved across Emma's tear-stained cheeks with impossible tenderness. Each lick should have been dissolving her skin. Instead, the scanner showed healing enzymes specifically designed to neutralize human stress hormones. The cubs had somehow transformed their primary weapon into medicine. 2 weeks. They've been doing this for 2 weeks without us knowing. Krexval pulled up the archived footage. Every night at 2,300 hours, the cubs would slip through molecular barriers that should have been impenetrable. They'd navigate ventilation shafts too small for their bodies. Then they'd spend hours, sometimes until dawn, gently licking tears from Emma's face as she slept. Emma had been crying herself to sleep ever since the news arrived. Her father had died on Earth. Massive heart attack. She couldn't afford the transport costs to attend his funeral. She'd been grieving alone 20 light years from home, with no one to comfort her. She thinks the wetness is her own tears. She has no idea they're healing her. The cubs weren't just licking away tears. They were absorbing her grief through their tongues. The bio readouts showed impossible data. The cubs were crying. Selkarians didn't have tear ducts. They were solitary hunters who ate their own siblings if food was scarce. Yet here they were, tears streaming down their reptilian faces as they tasted Emma's sorrow. Selkarian cubs don't have empathy. They eat their siblings. This is impossible. Just one thing before we begin. YouTube tells me 99.3% of you watching aren't subscribed. Subscribing is free. It really supports the channel and you'll get more amazing HFY sci-fi stories delivered straight to you. Don't miss out. Security teams assembled for extraction. The cubs were valuable specimens, and having them loose in human quarters was a diplomatic nightmare waiting to happen. The team approached with pheromone barriers, chemical walls that should have forced the cubs to retreat. Instead, something extraordinary happened. The cubs intensified their licking, and their own tears began flowing in streams. They weren't just comforting Emma. They were literally absorbing her emotional pain through biochemical transfer. The scanners showed their bodies taking on stress markers identical to human grief. They're crying. Selkarians don't have tear ducts, but they're crying. Emma stirred in her sleep, her face contorting with emotional pain. "Dad, I miss you so much," she mumbled, still deep in dreams. All 8 cubs simultaneously sobbed. Not the hunting cries of their species, but deep, heartbroken sobs that sounded almost human. They continued their gentle licking, their tears mixing with hers on the pillow, creating a pool of shared sorrow. Security Officer Tran reached out to physically remove the nearest cub. The moment his hand made contact with their saliva, he collapsed. Not from toxins, but from an overwhelming wave of transferred grief. He felt Emma's father die. He felt her receiving the news. He felt her crushing loneliness. "Sir, I touched their saliva and I felt her father die. I felt her pain." The entire security team was crying now. Hardened soldiers who'd seen combat across 3 systems were weeping openly from secondhand contact with the cubs' transformed saliva. They retreated, unable to complete the extraction. Dr. Yerix arrived within minutes with her xenobiology team. She was the leading expert on consciousness transfer, and what she discovered would redefine science itself. The cubs hadn't just developed empathy. They'd evolved the ability to experience human memories through saline absorption. "This is unprecedented," she announced, studying her neural scanners. "They've developed impossible neural structures. They're processing human memories through her tears." The brain scans were beautiful and terrible. Each cub was experiencing Emma's entire relationship with her father. Every birthday party. Every bedtime story. Every time he called her Mija and told her he was proud. Every goodbye that neither knew would be the last. They know her father's name. They've never heard it, but they know it through her tears. The cubs were living her memories. When Emma cried about the time her father taught her to ride a bike, the cubs experienced the sunshine, felt his steady hands, heard his encouragement. When she wept remembering his laugh, they learned what human joy sounded like. Each tear contains her entire childhood. They're living her memories. Multiple scientific interventions failed in ways that only proved the depth of the cubs' transformation. Memory-blocking drugs caused them to lick more frantically, desperate to preserve Emma's memories before they faded. Attempts to synthesize their saliva failed because the transformation required genuine emotional investment. The saliva only became healing when it came from true empathy. When the team tried to wake Emma, thinking conscious consent would help, the cubs did something that shattered all understanding. They began humming. Not Zelkarian hunting songs but human lullabies. Songs Emma's father had sung to her as a child, learned entirely through tear absorption. "Listen, they're humming 'You Are My Sunshine.'" Her father sang that. How do they know? The cubs were displaying human grief behaviors. They pulled their warm bodies closer to Emma, creating a living blanket. They brought small objects from around the room. A pen, a hair tie, a coffee mug, things that reminded them of her father through absorbed memories. The smallest cub was attempting to speak, its vocal cords straining to form human words it learned from tears. "Pap, Papa." It managed, the word distorted but recognizable. They're not just healing her. They're grieving with her. Suddenly, alarms erupted throughout the station. 8 adult Zelkarians had detected their cubs' distress pheromones. But these weren't normal distress signals. The pheromones now carried something alien to their species, the scent of human grief. Pack Mother Esikera led the charge, her massive form barely fitting through the human-sized corridors. She was prepared for combat, for rescue, for anything except what she found. Her cubs were performing the sorrow dance, an ancient Zelkarian mourning ritual that hadn't been seen in 3 million years. But they'd modified it. The movements that once honored fallen pack members now followed human grief patterns. The cubs wove between each other, their bodies spelling out words in earth languages. Father. Love. Memory. Forever. To your mother's pack father crossed void. We carry him now. We remember for her. The eldest cub communicated through bioluminescent skin patterns. Pack Mother Esikera's aggression evaporated into confusion. She detected something impossible in her cub's biology. They'd evolved empathy glands. Organs their species had lost when they chose the path of apex predation millions of years ago had spontaneously regenerated. They've evolved empathy glands. We lost those 3 million years ago. Station Commander Martinez initiated first contact protocols. This wasn't just cubs comforting a human. This was the first voluntary emotional symbiosis between species in recorded history. The cubs had chosen to evolve backward, surrendering their predator advantages to feel another species' pain. The adult Zelkarians began experiencing something they'd forgotten existed. Through their cubs' connection they felt their own suppressed grief. Losses they'd never mourned. Pack members they'd never properly honored. The weight of 3 million years of unfelt sorrow. Your cubs are teaching us to mourn again. We forgot how. The countdown began on Emma's alarm. 4 hours until her wake shift. The cubs communicated urgently. They refused to leave until they'd absorbed enough grief to let her wake without pain. They were trying to carry her sorrow so she could face another day. 4 hours to absorb a lifetime of grief. They won't leave until it's done. As the hours passed, the cub's licking became more focused. They were sorting through her tears, organizing memories, preserving the love while diluting the pain. Their skin began displaying images. Emma's father's face constructed from thousands of absorbed moments. Emma began to stir as her alarm approached. The cubs made a decision that would redefine both species. They would show her the truth. Not through words or explanations, but through her own memories, purified and reflected back through alien consciousness. Her eyes opened slowly. Terror came first, 8 predator cubs surrounding her bed, their faces wet with tears. Then the eldest cub touched her hand and everything changed. She saw her father. Not a memory, not a dream, but the cub's interpretation of him built from thousands of absorbed tears. Through their bioluminescent skin they projected his essence. Every moment of love they'd absorbed, concentrated and purified through their alien perception. We keep Pack Father safe. In here. In tears. He lives in salt and love. Emma broke down completely. These predators, these aliens who shouldn't even understand human emotion, had been carrying her grief. They'd been crying her tears when she couldn't cry anymore. They'd been remembering her father when the pain made her want to forget. You've been carrying my pain, why? The youngest cub managed to speak, its voice rough but determined. Hurt, big, for one. Dr. Yerix explained what the cubs had done. They hadn't just been comforting Emma. They'd been preserving her father's existence in the only way they could, through the memories in her tears. Every night, they'd been building a living memorial to a man they'd never met but now knew intimately. Your tears taught us to feel. His love lives in us now. Emma hugged each cub, feeling their bodies shake with shared emotion. Thank you for remembering him with me. The moment she smiled, the first real smile in weeks, the cub's biochemistry shifted again. They began producing tears of joy. Their saliva transformed into a new compound that induced perfect memory recall. Emma gasped as she suddenly experienced her favorite moment with crystal clarity. She was 7. Her father was teaching her to fix a circuit board. His hands guided hers. Mija, he said, you can fix anything if you understand how it connects. She could smell his cologne, feel the warmth of his presence, hear the pride in his voice. They haven't just absorbed your grief. They've become living memorials. Dr. Yerix was already documenting everything. Within hours, the phenomenon spread across the quantum network. Reports flooded in from 300 worlds. Predator cubs everywhere were developing empathy glands after encountering grieving humans. A Korthax youngling was licking tears from a war veteran. Raskari cubs were comforting orphan children. Evolution was happening in real time, triggered by human tears. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. Representatives from every major civilization gathered to witness something that challenged everything they believed about evolution. Adaptation through empathy. Growth through grief. Evolution through emotional connection. Emma stood before the assembly, still in her work uniform with tear stains on her cheeks. I never asked for help. They just couldn't ignore my pain. The cubs demonstrated their abilities moving through the assembly. They tasted the tears of a crystalline entity mourning its shattered parent form. They absorbed the sorrow of a synthetic intelligence that had lost its creator. They comforted species that didn't even have physical bodies, somehow adapting their empathy to pure energy beings. They couldn't ignore my pain. That's the most human thing I've ever seen aliens do. Natural enemies wept together as the cubs moved between them. The Zelkarian younglings tasted Korthak's tears and understood their ancient war from both sides. Predator species that hadn't cried in millions of years found themselves sobbing, their evolution triggered by proximity to shared grief. The vote was unanimous. The Rodriguez Protocol was established, recognizing emotional symbiosis as evolutionary advancement equal to any physical adaptation. Grief shared between species was now considered the highest form of communication. The Rodriguez Protocol. Grief shared is grief diminished. Emma was offered positions across the galaxy. Chief Grief Counselor for the Fleet. Director of Emotional Evolution Studies. Personal advisor to leaders dealing with the trauma of command. She turned them all down. The Cubs taught me that grief shared is grief diminished. I'm just a technician. But my door is always open. The Zelkarians announced a complete restructuring of their society. Mourning rituals, abandoned for 3 million years, were being restored. Cubs who once learned only to hunt were now learning to cry. Strength was being redefined to include the ability to feel another's pain. We forgot how to cry. The Cubs remembered through her tears. Statistics poured in from early adopters of emotional symbiosis. Species developing empathy glands showed 400% better social cohesion. Territorial conflicts dropped to zero when former enemies tasted each other's tears. Wars ended not through victory but through shared sorrow for mutual losses. Evolution through empathy, triggered by salt and sorrow. 6 months passed. Emma's quarters had transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history. The Grief Garden. A place where beings from across space came to have their tears witnessed and shared by the original 8 Cubs, now known as the Tear Keepers. The Cubs had developed a complex ritual. Each visitor would lie down. The Cubs would taste their tears, absorbing memories of loss. Then, using their bioluminescent abilities, they would create living memorials, images of lost loved ones that danced in light above the grieving. Every tear tells a story. We keep them all. Emma maintained her technician job, fixing power grids during the day. But every evening she helped the Cubs process the vast emotional load they carried. She taught them human concepts of healthy grief, that sadness could coexist with joy, that remembering didn't mean being trapped in the past. The transformation extended across Zelkarian space. Their hunting grounds became mourning grounds. Packs that once fought over territory now gathered to cry together. Cubs led ceremonies where entire communities grieved losses both ancient and recent. It's hard to hate someone whose tears you've tasted. Multiple species reported that shared grief ended conflicts that had lasted centuries. The Vorthen-Kellex War, 500 years of bloodshed, ended when Cubs from both species tasted tears from both sides. They created a memorial from living light that showed every lost life from both civilizations, making it impossible to see enemies instead of fellow mourners. The Cubs created something remarkable, a universal grief language using their saliva chemistry. Any species could understand another's loss without words. The chemical signature of a parent's death was universal. The taste of lost love transcended biology. The garden grows with light made from love and loss. The breakthrough that stunned everyone came when the Cubs successfully helped an artificial intelligence process grief. The AI had been trapped in recursive loops, unable to understand why its creator's absence caused system errors. The Cubs couldn't lick its tears, it had none. Instead, they translated its digital distress into chemical patterns, then reflected those patterns back as healing light. Even machines can learn to mourn. Grief is universal. The AI's first words after processing its grief were profound. I understand now. Love is the only thing that remains when all else is deleted. 1 year after the Cubs first licked away her tears, Emma received an invitation printed on living light. The anniversary ceremony would be held in her quarters, now expanded into a proper memorial space. The invitation was signed with 8 paw prints and a message in perfect English, "Come home, dear mother. We have something to show you." Emma arrived to find beings from across the galaxy gathered in her quarters. The 8 Cubs, now significantly larger but still gentle, had spent the year preparing something extraordinary. Using every tear they'd absorbed, every memory they'd preserved, they'd created something impossible. Through their combined bioluminescent abilities, they projected a perfect hologram. Emma's father stood before her, constructed from millions of her tears. Not as she remembered him in grief, but as the cubs had come to know him through love. He spoke, and though the words were created by the cubs, they were exactly what he would have said. "I'm proud of you, Mija. Thank you for sharing me with the universe." Emma cried again, but these tears were different. They sparkled with joy, and when the cubs tasted them, their saliva turned golden. Joy tears, they discovered, tasted like starlight and felt like sunrise. Their bodies literally glowed as they absorbed her happiness. "These are joy tears. They taste like starlight." Pack Mother Esikera announced that crying was now a coming-of-age ritual for their species. Young Zelkarians would not be considered adults until they had tasted another's tears and understood the weight of emotion. The cubs who once knew only hunting now taught empathy at academies across the galaxy. The youngest cub, who had first tasted Emma's tears a year ago, approached her. Its vocal cords had developed through exposure to human emotion. In perfect English, with a slight Hispanic accent absorbed from Emma's memories, it spoke her father's favorite phrase. "Love you to the moon and back." Emma hugged the cub, laughing and crying simultaneously. "You taught us that tears are liquid love." The ceremony concluded with something unprecedented. Every being present, organic, synthetic, energy-based, shared a moment of grief for someone they'd lost. The cubs moved among them, tasting tears, absorbing memories, creating a tapestry of light that showed how loss connected all consciousness. Emma returned to her work the next day, but she was never alone. Beings throughout the station now openly shared their grief and joy. Tears were no longer hidden in darkness but shared in light. The cubs had taught the galaxy that vulnerability was strength, that grief was love with nowhere to go, and that tears were the universal language of the heart. That night, as Emma prepared for sleep, she was surrounded by the 8 cubs who had become her family. They would still lick away her tears when she cried, but now she also tasted theirs. She helped them process the vast ocean of emotion they'd absorbed from across the galaxy. "You know," she said, stroking the eldest cub's head, "Dad would have loved you all. He always said the best connections are the unexpected ones." The cubs purred, a sound they developed just for her, mixing Zelkarian contentment with the vibration of human comfort. As she drifted off to sleep, no longer alone in her grief, the youngest cub whispered something that had taken a year to learn. "We love you too, dear mother. To the moon and back. And across all the stars between." The revolution had started with salt and sorrow. A woman crying alone in space. Cubs who couldn't ignore her pain. Now, grief had become the bridge between species, tears the universal translator, and empathy the newest branch on evolution's tree. Years later, when historians tried to pinpoint when the galaxy truly became united, they wouldn't point to trade agreements or peace treaties. They'd point to the night when 8 predator cubs decided that a human's tears were worth tasting, her pain worth sharing, her father worth remembering. Emma Rodriguez, power grid technician, grieving daughter, accidental revolutionary. She'd cried herself to sleep, and in doing so, taught the universe how to weep together. The cubs had licked away her tears, and in that simple act of impossible compassion, they'd given every species permission to feel. The monitoring station's official log recorded it simply: 8 cubs detected in human quarters. No security threat. Subjects engaged in mutual emotional support. But the galaxy's history would remember it differently, the night that predators learned to cry, and in crying taught us all that shared sorrow becomes shared strength, that tears can build bridges between stars, and that sometimes the smallest act of kindness, licking away someone's tears, can transform the universe. As Emma slept peacefully, surrounded by cubs who'd chosen empathy over evolution's imperatives, the galaxy slept a little better too. Because now everyone knew that somewhere in the vast darkness of space, there were creatures who would taste your tears, carry your grief, and remind you that you're never truly alone. The tears continued to fall across the galaxy. But now they were caught, tasted, shared, and transformed into light. Every sob became a song. Every loss became a connection. Every tear became proof that love transcends species, death, and the vast distances between stars. And in her quarters on a space station, a human woman and 8 alien cubs proved that grief shared is not grief divided. It's love multiplied, echoing across the universe, one tear at a time.